For as long as I can remember, my husband has always expressed to me how meaningful turning 40 would be for him. His father passed away at the young age of 39, so he had just this one particular wish to live longer than his father did. So, when his 40th birthday was approaching, I started thinking about how special it would be to organize a surprise party for him. It felt like the perfect moment to mark the occasion in a big, joyful way. I wanted to plan a celebration where he could be surrounded by the people who loved him the most, his closest family and friends. So, I went all out during the planning process. I wanted everything to be perfect, from the guest list to the decorations, and I even extended a special invitation to my mother-in-law, Cheryl. Cheryl and I have always had a close relationship, and I knew how much it would mean to my husband to have his mom there for this occasion. She lives out of town, so I made sure to book a flight for her to arrive on the day of the party. Everything was coming together, and I couldn't wait to see the look on my husband's face when he walked into a room filled with the people who cared about him the most. On the night of my husband's birthday party, everything was in place. The decorations were perfect, the guests were quietly waiting. The house was dark, and we all stood silently, our excitement barely contained as we waited for him to come back home. Earlier that day, I had set the stage without giving anything away. Over breakfast, I had casually mentioned to him that I would be at my parents' house that evening, hoping to keep his expectations low. My goal was for him to think I wasn't planning anything special for his birthday. I imagined how amazed he would be when he walked through the door and discovered the actual surprise waiting for him. When I heard my husband's car pull into the driveway, my heart started racing. I was practically tingling with anticipation. We all stayed perfectly still, listening to the sounds of him outside, his footsteps, the faint jingle of his keys as he fumbled to unlock the door. I giggled to myself, picturing him trying key after key in the dark, probably muttering to himself in frustration. Then, finally, the door swung open. We all jumped up at once, shouting, "Surprise! Happy birthday!" as the lights flickered on. But instead of the joyful expression I had been eagerly awaiting, there, standing in the doorway, was my husband Jackson, his tie loosened, arms wrapped around his coworker, April, in the middle of a kiss. Everyone around us fell silent, and the room, which had been so full of happiness just seconds before, was now thick with shock and disbelief. People gasped in horror, staring at Jackson and April. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. For some context, my husband and April are co-workers. They have been working together for quite a while. She's younger than both of us and is one of his subordinates at work. Over the years, I've seen her at the annual office Christmas parties when Jackson would bring me along. I've observed how she interacts with people, especially with him. At times, she'd come off a bit flirtatious, and would even call herself as his work wife jokingly, but I had never taken it seriously. I would brush it off, mostly because she seemed to behave that way with almost all the older men at the office. I thought this was just part of her personality and never really let her behavior bother me because I trusted my husband, and didn't see her as a serious threat. But now, standing in the doorway, seeing Jackson kissing her, it was humiliating in a way I had never imagined. I felt a rush of emotions. When my husband realized that we were all there and staring at him, he finally stopped. His eyes were unfocused, and he seemed drunk, stumbling a bit. He looked around at the people gathered for his surprise party and simply said, "Oops," before bursting into laughter again. Meanwhile, April stood beside him, awkwardly fixing her shirt, her lipstick almost wiped clean because of their kiss. The room was silent, and all I could feel was the crushing weight of the embarrassment and hurt, with all eyes on me, waiting for how I'd respond. Cheryl, my mother-in-law, was the first to break the silence. She stood up and demanded loudly, "Jackson, what the hell are you doing?" Jackson's eyes widened as he did not expect to see his mother here and slowly turned his head toward her. He tried to explain in his dazed state, "I didn't expect everyone to be here." He trailed off and looked a little embarrassed now. My heart raced as I confronted him directly, asking why he was with April in our house, kissing her, when I had organized this surprise party to celebrate his birthday. I had to know the answer, even though I was terrified of what he might say next. Jackson sighed and just shook his head. He glanced around the room before clearing his throat. In a casual tone, as if making a work announcement, he said he had planned to break the news another day. Then, with a sneer, he added that since the surprise party had exposed him in April, he might as well reveal the truth now. April and I are together. We've been dating for a few months now, and, he paused, glancing at her as if for confirmation before looking back at me, and I'm falling in love with her. I stood there, utterly stunned. What was my husband even talking about? My hands were trembling, my heart pounding in my chest, as the weight of his words settled in the air. He didn't just stop though, as he continued saying how he had tried to hold off his feelings for April for months, but this year he had realized that he needed to finally start living life on his own terms. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The words felt surreal, like they were coming from someone else, not the man I had spent years building a life with. He then went on this rant, talking about how his father had died young, never getting the chance to fulfill his dreams. "I don't want to end up like him," he said, his tone almost defiant. "I need to do what makes me happy before it's too late for me." My mouth hung open in disbelief, and I could feel the tears starting to well up in my eyes. It was like he was casting me aside, as if our history didn't even matter. In the heat of the moment, something inside me snapped. I felt furious and betrayed. I grabbed the birthday cake, the same cake I had spent time and care picking out for him, and without thinking, I hurled it at his face. The cake smashed all over his clothes. At first, everyone just gasped in shock, but then some began laughing at his face. Our guests could see just how rude my husband was to humiliate me this way, and I guess they wanted to show their support. Jackson was understandably furious as he wiped his face. His voice, thick with anger, echoed through the room as he screamed at me, "Look what you've done. You've dirtied my shirt." It was almost laughable how trivial his complaint was, given the gravity of the situation. Here he was, fixated on the state of his shirt, as though that was the most pressing issue, not the fact that he had just humiliated me in front of everyone we knew, openly flaunting his betrayal. Without sparing me another glance, Jackson stormed off upstairs to probably change, while April stood there unashamedly looking at everyone. As soon as Jackson was out of sight, I took the opportunity to glare at her. I then marched over to her, grabbed her by the hair, and dragged her outside. Her shrill protests filled the air, accusing me of manhandling her, but not a single guest came to her aid. No one moved. No one even batted an eye. Even Cheryl was furiously shouting at April for having the sheer audacity to try to sleep with Jackson under my own roof, at our party, in front of our friends. Once outside, I spun her around and let out the words I had been holding in like venom on my tongue. "I just can't believe you. You slept with my husband after all the times you've seen me at this party, after you've seen us together for so many years?" The disbelief, the hurt, it all came pouring out. But April wasn't fazed. She wasn't even ashamed. She just scoffed, her lips curling into a smug, defiant smirk, as if I were the one in the wrong. With disdain in her voice, she declared that Jackson wanted her and that I had no right to stand between them, adding that he was going to leave me one day anyways. Her words felt like knives slicing through, as she continued by saying that instead of placing blame on her, maybe I should reflect on why I had failed as a wife, suggesting that my inability to keep him satisfied was the reason he had turned to her. Every word she said pushed me closer to the edge. My mind could barely process the nerve of this woman. She taunted me further. "He told me how you don't understand him the way I do. You don't make him smile the way I do. That's why he's leaving you. He deserves someone better than you." Hearing those words, something in me snapped. I didn't even think. My vision blurred, and the next thing I knew, my hand flew through the air and connected with her face in a resounding slap. It was one thing for Jackson to say those hurtful things to me, but it was an entirely different kind of betrayal for this woman, April, to throw them back in my face. She started to cry, clutching her face where I had slapped her, her cheek now an angry shade of red, burning from the impact. Through her tears, she screamed a stream of profanities at me, her voice shrill and shaking with anger. Before I could even respond, Cheryl stepped in, her voice loud and unyielding as she confronted April. "If you don't leave this property right now, you'll be getting a slap from me too," Cheryl threatened, her words sharp with disgust. April, still fuming, stared back, but she didn't dare move towards Cheryl. By now, the other guests had trickled outside, drawn by the chaos unfolding in our front yard. They stood around, watching the scene unfold in stunned silence, some whispering amongst themselves, others too shocked to even speak. It was a spectacle none of them had expected when they arrived at our party, and I could feel their judgmental eyes flickering between me and April. And then, as if on cue, Jackson reappeared. He walked out with a freshly changed shirt, looking disturbingly composed given everything that had just happened. A bag was slung over his shoulder, and it took me a moment to process that he had packed a few of his things. When he saw April clutching her cheek, tears streaming down her face, he rushed to her side, putting his arm around her protectively, as if she were the victim in all of this. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he yelled at me, his voice full of anger and disappointment. He looked at me like I was the one who had crossed a line, as if I was the one who had done something unforgivable. In his eyes, I was the villain at this moment for slapping the woman who had slept with him. Then he spat out words that broke me all over again. "I can't deal with this any longer. I am done," he shouted. "I want you out of the house when I come back from our trip. I hope to never see your face again at trip." He was leaving me, breaking our marriage apart, and already planning a weekend getaway with her? I stood there, frozen in disbelief and pain, watching as he took April to his car, And then both of them drove away without a second thought. I felt a deep, aching emptiness as I watched the tail lights of his car disappear down the street. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. Cheryl looked as devastated as I felt. Everyone had just witnessed the end of my marriage in real time, and I felt so embarrassed. Cheryl, bless her, stepped up and took control of the situation immediately. She politely asked everyone to leave, thanking them for coming and apologizing for what had happened. People did come up to me to give me awkward hugs and offered me a few words of comfort before walking out while I just felt completely numb, still trying to process what had just happened. After everyone had left, Cheryl guided me to sit down. She handed me a glass of water, and even though my hands were trembling, I barely noticed. Once I knew it was her and me, I started to cry big, uncontrollable sobs. I had held it in for too long. I didn't want to cry in front of everyone, but now that I was alone with her, it all came out: the shock, the humiliation, the sheer disbelief at what had just happened. My husband had destroyed our marriage at his own surprise birthday party, in front of his friends and family, all while kissing his coworker. And then he had the audacity to even kick me out. Through my tears, I confided in Cheryl that I was completely lost. I had no idea what to do, where to go, or how to rebuild my life. I had invested so many years into this marriage, caring for my husband through his illnesses, cooking, cleaning, and even giving up my career because he always wanted a stay-at-home wife. And now, he had ripped the rug out from under me and was leaving me with nothing. I was lost physically and emotionally. I couldn't imagine packing up my life and leaving the home we had shared for years. Hearing this, Cheryl shook her head firmly and then reminded me of something that I had apparently forgotten. You see, the house Jackson and I had lived in wasn't truly ours. It belonged to Cheryl's late husband, a home filled with memories that she had cherished. After his passing, she graciously allowed Jackson and me to live here so we could start a family and build our life together. At the time, it felt like a gift, a fresh start for us in a place filled with love and support. But now, everything about that life had shattered, and the weight of what Jackson had done was more than just a betrayal. It was a violation of the very trust Cheryl had placed in us. After what my son did to you, I'm embarrassed to have raised such a monster, she told me. Her voice was thick with sorrow, the kind only a mother could feel when she realized her own child has become someone she barely recognizes. She wrapped her arms around me in a hug that felt like both comfort and a promise. She then looked me straight in the eyes and said, "This is my house, and I decide who lives here. And I'm choosing you." Her words were a lifeline, offering me a sense of control in a situation that felt wildly out of my hands. She continued to say how she wasn't going to let Jackson and April get away with what they had done. She wanted to teach Jackson a lesson, to show him that his actions had real, painful consequences. She continued with a firm voice, stating that he needed to be reminded that destroying a marriage and walking away would not happen without paying the price. Then she added something that made me smile, even in the midst of all the chaos. "There's no way I'm letting April Scrania move in here with my son. She's not ruining my family home." Cheryl's protectiveness over me was something I hadn't expected, since I thought she would eventually support her son, but here she was instead, looking for me. Jackson might have thought he could walk out of our marriage and into another woman's arms, but Cheryl and I were about to show him that life wouldn't be that easy. I admit, hearing Cheryl's words had given me a sense of relief, and it was like a weight had been lifted, knowing I wasn't going to be cast out of the house I'd called home. Cheryl's backing gave me the strength I needed to take control of the situation. So, long story short, over the weekend, I signed a proper rental agreement with her, making everything official. I wanted evidence, something concrete that would prevent Jackson from ever kicking me out. With the agreement in place, I knew I had solid ground to stand on. That same weekend, I methodically packed all of Jackson's things. It was oddly therapeutic, boxing up the remnants of the life we had shared. I piled them neatly on the porch outside, where he could easily collect them when he returned from his trip. It wasn't until a week later that I finally noticed his car pull into the driveway. By that time, I had already made all the preparations. I'd installed security cameras outside the house because I knew what was coming. I needed the cameras for my own protection, just in case things went sideways. I had also changed the locks. There was no way I was letting him barge in here and disrupt my life again. Sure enough, when he tried his key in the door, nothing happened. He fumbled with the lock for a moment before realizing he was locked out. His face twisted in frustration, and soon enough, he started banging on the door, his fists thudding against the wood like a relentless drum. "Open the door," he yelled, his voice thick with frustration. I watched him through the camera, feeling oddly calm. I wasn't about to let him back in, not after everything that had happened. So instead of opening the door, I spoke to him through the intercom, my voice as casual as I could make it. "What are you doing here, Jackson?" I asked, sounding almost bored. His response was instant and furious. He began yelling, accusing me of overstaying, and that he had given me plenty of time already to pack my things and leave, insisting that I should have gone by now. His voice was laced with contempt as he ranted about how tired he was of me, how he couldn't stand my so-called neediness and desperation anymore by continuing to stay here when he had clearly ended our marriage in front of everyone. He didn't want to deal with me, he said he just wanted the divorce, and for me to disappear from his life. His eyes then fell on the boxes packed outside and he became silent. I guess he must not have realized earlier that those were his things outside. He glared at the boxes, then back at the door, shaking his head as if this was all some ridiculous joke. But it wasn't, and he knew it. "You think you can throw out my things like this? You think you're going to get away with this?" He stomped up to the door again, banging on it with renewed aggression, his fist slamming against the wood. "You have no right to do this. I'll take you to court if I have to," he shouted, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You hear me? I'll sue you for this. You can't just throw me out of my own house." I let him carry on, watching through the camera as he vented, pacing angrily back and forth on the porch. It was almost amusing, how he still thought he was in control of the situation. I leaned closer to the intercom, my voice cool and collected as I explained that this was not his house but his mom's. I had signed a rental agreement with Cheryl, making the house legally mine to live in now, and pointed out that he was the one trespassing. After a brief pause to give him time to comprehend my words, I continued to state that if he wanted to take the matter to court, he was welcome to try, but I didn't believe he would have much of a case. I demanded that he take his things and leave immediately or I would call the police. I watched Jackson through the camera, his confusion etched across his face as if he couldn't quite wrap his head around what was happening. It was almost pitiful, really, the way he stood there frozen for a moment. But then, just as quickly as the confusion appeared, it was replaced by fury. He screamed at the door, and then, in a flurry of movement, yanked out his phone. I had no doubt he was calling his mother, probably hoping she'd swoop in to defend him, to undo the situation. But I knew Cheryl had no intention of doing that. I was certain she'd tell him exactly what I had. This wasn't his house anymore, and he needed to accept the consequences of his actions. As I watched him pace furiously on the porch, kicking over boxes and cursing under his breath, it was clear that whatever conversation he had with Cheryl wasn't going in his favor. His frustration boiled over as he stomped around, and kicked over one of the boxes I had so carefully packed, sending his things spilling across the porch, and I could hear him shouting profanities at the door. His voice echoed through the intercom as he called me a thief, accusing me of stealing his house. "I'm going to make you pay for this," he kept repeating. I could have responded to his insults, but I didn't see the point. I knew he couldn't do anything, not really. He could try to drag this through the courts if he wanted, but we both knew he didn't have a leg to stand on. I had done everything by the book, and there was no way he could claim I had wronged him when he had been the one to break our marriage vows, to betray me in the worst way possible. After what felt like an hour of him raging outside, the fight finally drained out of him. He looked defeated, his shoulders slumped as the realization sunk in that there was no winning this. With no other choice, Jackson began to finally move his boxes into his car. I watched as he shoved the last of his things into the trunk, slammed it shut, and then drove away. Since that day, I've received multiple voicemails from both Jackson and April. They've bombarded me with messages, each one more bitter than the last. April, in particular, seems to relish in calling me a witch for managing to kick Jackson out of the house. She keeps talking about how they both had wanted to start afresh in this home and that I had stolen that dream from them. Jackson, it turns out, has been living in a motel now, and according to their messages, he is miserable. Ida for kicking my husband out of the house after what he did to me? Update 1. To clarify, the reason Jackson isn't living with April currently is because she shares a place with 2 other roommates, and their landlord is strict about the rules. Apparently, she isn't allowed to let Jackson move in, which is hilarious. If they're truly that committed to each other, then I think April should break her rental agreement and find a place where the 2 of them can play house. But honestly, they can do whatever they want now. It's no longer my problem. What is my focus now is making sure that Jackson pays for what he did in more ways than one. I've already filed for divorce, and I'm prepared to fight tooth and nail to make sure he pays a hefty alimony. He may have thought he could walk out of this marriage without consequences, but he's about to learn that actions have repercussions, especially when you betray someone who's been nothing but loyal to you. He wants a life with April? That's fine. But he's going to help me rebuild the life he destroyed, whether he likes it or not. Update 2. It's been 2 months since my last update. I took all your suggestions into account and finally sent an email to Jackson's company about his ongoing affair with April. I knew that airing our dirty laundry wouldn't change the betrayal he'd inflicted on me, but I felt it was necessary for the sake of his other subordinates. In my email, I detailed everything Jackson had confessed to me about their affair, laying bare the fact that it had been going on for months. I recounted specific incidents that I had witnessed, including April's flirtatious behavior with older men at various office parties. I wanted to paint a clear picture of their relationship not just as a personal betrayal but as a continued violation of workplace ethics. To my surprise, after a week of silence, I started hearing from some of Jackson's coworkers who had also become my friends over the years that the HR department had launched a full investigation into the matter. I hadn't expected the company to take my email seriously, but it seemed word had gotten around about his favoritism toward April over other employees. He had been giving her preferential treatment for a long time, which had always raised eyebrows and led to murmurs of discontent within the office. So, the combination of my detailed account and the complaints from other employees forced the company to investigate. Jackson's affair was no longer a private matter, it had crossed into professional territory, and that changed everything. Days later, I learned from my friends that Jackson had been fired as a result of the investigation. I could hardly contain my satisfaction at the thought of him being let go, stripped of the privileges he had taken for granted while engaging in this affair. As for April, I am not sure if she will face the same fate. There are whispers among my friends that HR is still looking into her role in the situation, but I haven't heard any definitive news. Part of me hopes she faces consequences, too, but I also realize that it is ultimately out of my hands now. For anyone who's worried about my alimony situation and whether I'd be entitled to anything once Jackson gets fired, rest assured, I'm in a good position. Over the years, Jackson has earned a substantial income, and I've realized he hardly ever spent any of it on us. We never went on vacations, had very few date nights, and he rarely bought me anything. Looking back, it's clear that the red flags were always there, I just didn't want to see them. Anyway, my focus is solely on finalizing the divorce. I'm committed to making sure I get what I deserve. I've been through too much to settle for anything less than what's fair. With Jackson's job loss and everything else that's unfolded, I feel like I'm on the brink of a fresh start. I'm ready to move forward. Update 3, it's been 7 months since my last update. Sorry for my late update, but I have been divorced from my ex for some time now and have started dating again. Jackson held a grudge against me throughout the divorce proceedings for the way I allegedly cost him his job, but there was nothing he could do about it. Multiple witnesses had seen him kiss April during his surprise party and had heard him confess about his affair. In the end, I didn't receive a massive settlement during the alimony negotiations, but I did get more than enough to start rebuilding my life. The first thing I did after my divorce was go on a solo vacation by myself and lounge on the beach all day, sipping cocktails. I am currently working part-time at my friend's boutique and plan on applying for full-time jobs in the future. Cheryl and I have continued to be in each other's life. She has been a solid rock for me throughout this ordeal. Her kindness and understanding have given me the right space to heal. As for Jackson and April, they are still dating. Apparently, April was never fired from the company, but I've heard that her coworkers no longer trust her. Most of them seem to have distanced themselves from her, as they don't want to be associated with someone who has been at the center of such a huge company scandal.